Hi, I'm Femi Oke, and you're in the stream. International experts looking into the case of 43 missing Mexican students wrap up their work this month. But where does that leave the investigation? That's what we'll be looking into on today's show. So when this story broke in 2014, it sparked international outrage, and to this day, the families and activists are still demanding answers. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, has been following the story right from the very beginning. Malika.
And it started with street protests. From street protests, it moved to social media campaigns, but between the two, there's always something new happening on the activist front to make sure this story isn't forgotten. Take a look at just some of the hashtags that are still being used, many with the name of the town where the students are from. And while the protests aren't as big as they used to be, families are still coming out regularly to keep the movement alive. Last month, demonstrators took to the streets of Mexico City to commemorate 18 months since the students went missing. Have you been following this story? If so, what kind of impact do you think these campaigns have had? Tweet us with hashtag AJStream.
I'm Fernando Garcia. I'm a human rights lawyer in Mexico, and I'm in the stream.
More than a year and a half has passed since 43 students from Ayotzinapa, a town in Mexico's southern Guerrero state, went missing, and the accounts of what happened are still unclear. The government originally said that the students were apprehended by police officers and then handed over to drug cartel allies. But in 2015, a panel of independent experts from Inter-American Commission on Human Rights released a report. That report pointed out flaws in the government's investigation. In a country where more than 20,000 people have disappeared over the past decade, the Commission's involvement brought hope to families of those missing. Recently, the government announced that the Commission would wrap up its work this month. So what happens to the case? The Deputy Interior Minister says the government is committed to the investigation. But how do Mexicans prevent this tragedy from being another forgotten, disappeared story? To help us get into this, we're joined by John Gibler. He's an independent journalist and author in Mexico City. Jose Carreño is the foreign news editor at Excelsior newspaper in Mexico City. Citlalli Hernandez is a human rights campaigner at Serapaz, that's a civil society organization, and Everard Meade is the director at the Transborder Institute in California. We also invited Mexican officials to be part of this discussion, but they didn't respond to our requests. So, trying to keep up with this story, John, how many investigations have there been so far into the missing students?
Official investigations, there was first the state government of Guerrero. That lasted only about 20 days until the federal government entered in. There's also been now 2 completed independent investigations from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and also from the Argentine anthropological forensics experts. And then there is another study in process at the moment of a panel of fire experts. I think 2 things very quickly that are important to distinguish is between what happened on the streets of Iguala on the night of September 26th, and then all of the debate that's been going on about what happened to the 43 disappeared. I think that the debate about trash dumps and burning temperatures has largely been used as a smokescreen to keep people from talking about what has already been documented, which was the nature of the operation against the students, which involved municipal police from 3 different municipalities, state police, federal police, with military intelligence operatives on the ground reporting in real time.
So John, you're so way ahead of us on this one. I'm just going to slow you down just a little bit. So I counted 4 investigations that you mentioned, and the whole idea about the dump and the burning and the fire investigation is because that was the government's idea of what had happened to the missing students. Ev, I see you're nodding your head. What did you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think just the idea that there's some kind of magic technical bullet that's going to solve this is a real misnomer, and it misses the larger phenomenon. And I think that's a great point that John was making.
I think our community would agree that there is no silver bullet that would solve this, and a few of them are explaining why. So this is Omar on Twitter. He says, how can you expect the independent investigators to deliver proper results if they face several obstacles and don't have the full support from authorities? So when talking about what those obstacles are, we have this tweet from Ely citizen who says, thanks to them, we know the official version of the events was shady, and they're talking about that independent panel. The PGR, which is the Attorney General's office, quickly presented conclusions hoping people would move on. Jose, do you think this is an accurate representation of what happened?
I am not sure. I mean, at this point, I am not sure of anything, if you want the truth. I think that the government's version is didn't help itself, didn't help the governments, didn't help the governments. Then in the other versions are, to a degree, are interested versions also. So I do not know, and I really don't think that we will ever have the truth in this whole thing.
I wish to say that just that and a few days ago the expertise from the who has been told a new version about what happened with 17 bodies. It's a version that it's not quite well, and it's been shamed how the Mexican press has been using this theme because it's foment this confusion that it's happening. I want to say it so that what's happening between the relationship about the government, Mexican government, with the International Committee of Human Rights, it's very shameful for all of us. It's very dangerous that they are lying to an international and this important international organization, and they are not getting straight about what they are saying. They are lying in several times, and now it's terrible that they are doing in the face to an international organization of this level that's supposed to be an organization that represents international cooperation. And I think it's very meaningful about what is happening and what's Mexican government able to do.
Citlalli, why do you...
Yeah, they're not just lying.
Yeah, go ahead, Ev. I was just going to ask
Citlalli, they're not just lying.
What are you basing the lies on? Or what are the accusation of the lies on, Ev?
Well, what I'm saying is it's actually beyond lying. They're actually trying to smear and discredit the experts. So the Mexican government announced a couple weeks ago that they're opening a criminal investigation against the executive secretary of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. In other words, the guy who's in charge of coordinating the international experts who have largely discredited the government's story. So they're trying to smear him, and they're trying to smear him in part because he's a Mexican guy who has a history as an activist, and he has enemies and rivals. But more importantly, I think, because they want to discredit the Ayotzinapa report, and then because the Inter-American Commission has announced that it's going to have public hearings on at least 4 more cases involving forced disappearances. So I think this is, really the government showing its hand and trying to cover up this story and make it go away.
John, I saw you nodding there when Ev talked about discrediting the account of these investigators. I want to play you a video comment from someone who says she's also not very optimistic about the government's version of events and what's happening. Her name is Christy Thornton, and she's followed this closely. Have a listen to what she had to say.
After this week, I'm afraid I'm not very optimistic about the Ayotzinapa case because the Mexican government continues to demonstrate a lack of political will to address the root of the problem, which is the impunity of the security forces resulting from government connections to the drug trade. Ending the mandate of the independent investigation shows that there's a limit to how far the government is willing to dig, lest the real scope of the corruption be uncovered. It's not at all clear that the Mexican government will take this investigation forward on their own.
So, John, why do you think the mandate was ended?
I think because the independent commission was doing a good job investigating, and so the government wanted to stop that as soon as possible. I think that it goes beyond lies that Ev was mentioning, and also Citlalli, and really goes to, I believe there's evidence to substantiate claims that the government has actually built a false crime scene, like explicitly fabricated a false crime scene.
Why? John, why would they do that?
Because they can't acknowledge the truth of what happened that night, which, from what we already know, involved federal, state, military, and municipal forces acting in coordination over a period of more than 9 hours, a geographical radius of some 30 kilometers, to kill, disappear, and mutilate students. That's something that's unacceptable for the state, like that they let that happen. And so what they've done is dig themselves in deeper and deeper into a cover-up version that falls apart, because there's been an unprecedented access of international experts to get into government investigative files and be able to disentangle them. I also want to just say very briefly that I understand the lack of optimism But I disagree with Jose's statement that we'll never know. I feel like that's almost a surrender from the outset. And what we have to do, especially in our role as journalists, is to pursue the truth no matter what, even if it takes 4 years or 15 years or who knows how long. But we can't give up because of the campaigns to smear and to disorient and to sow confusion and to discredit the investigations that have been independent.
John, let me just jump off that.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead, Jose.
The problem here is not so much if you want to know or you do not want to know the truth. The problem is that, in the one hand, it has been the information that has been so manipulated already, has been so handled for all around, that it's difficult to sift between what is what and what is truth. The second part of it is that there has been a very political use of this whole thing, and there is a very political, to a degree, the country is semi-divided. Those who want to believe the government's version and those who do not want to believe the government's version at all. And then the question is, nobody wants to accept what the other side is saying. So at this moment, the way that the government is nobody is going to believe the government, whatever they say, because if it doesn't fit with this truth, and the government is not willing to give in. So at the end of the day, those who suffer are, in the one hand, the families of the 43 and the government itself. So
we're chasing, so Jose and Citlalli, we're chasing our tails a little bit, because right now, none of us actually know what happened, whatever version you're listening to, and there have been 4 investigations so far. No one is absolutely sure. Allow me to just push things on a little bit more, because I actually want to hear what you feel has been the impact of the last 18 months. Let me just show you something here. We start with the President of Mexico's statement, and then we move on to the families and their reaction to the latest investigation.
Queremos mentira. No vamos a aceptar otra mentira más del gobierno, porque se ha dedicado a torturarnos, a destrozarnos el corazón.
So the family is saying, we're not done yet, we are not giving up yet. Impact from these last 18 months, Malika, what are you seeing?
It's interesting you mentioned that, Femi. We actually got a comment from someone named Gabriel, who tweeted a lot also, and he talked about what he thinks the impact has been. Have a listen to what he had to say.
I don't have faith that this case will be solved entirely, but I do acknowledge the fact that the pressure that the society put upon the authorities had a positive effect for this case to at least be investigated. But we have to bear in mind that in Mexico there are more than 30,000 people that have gone missing in the past decade or so, and none of those cases have been investigated. So if we really want to end forced disappearances in this country, we have to demand justice for all the victims, not just the 43. Otherwise, we're giving a wrong message to the authorities that this is not a systematic problem, but just an isolated case.
So he says the impact is that at least society put pressure on the government for there to even be an investigation.
Oh, I think that's really true. And I mean, looking at Mexico, there's no time in the recent history of Mexico, in the last 25 years for sure, and probably really in the last century, where there's been a civil society awakening and a broad rejection of the government that crosses lines of class, ethnicity, geography. I mean, this is a real awakening, and that's something that we shouldn't lose that. And I agree with Jose a little bit that the debates become kind of polarized, but the question that I would toss back to him in light of that awakening is also who should get the benefit of the doubt. And I think that the record of the last 10 years, across party lines, in Mexico is that the government really doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's exactly what civil society is telling the government right now. They need to be more transparent.
I'd like to answer that if you can. I think that the problem with the record is not 10 years back, it's about 100 years back, 50 if you want. That is the real issue, because this is the situation. The 43 are a very emblematic situation right now, but this kind of problem has been there for the last 30, 40, 50 years. That is, that now there's a civil society surging up. That's okay. That's wonderful. But then the question is at this point, and as the other person said at one point, it is the solution of the 43 doesn't solve the rest of the problem. That is the real issue.
All right, Jose, take a pause for a moment. Citlalli, yes, go ahead. I'd love to hear from you. Citlalli.
Well, yes, I think this is not about a faith team. This is not about who inspires your confidence. This is about facts. And there are some things that has been told for the experts that explain that the version of the government cannot be truth. This is they are being questioning very well, and what we are needed now is where are the students? We need to forget about the version of Cocula's trash dump. This is not about Cocula. This is about where are the students, why they are not researching, following all the lines that has been spread from the files. They are only obsessed with one version that said the students are in somewhere that cannot be possible. In fact, there's been 2 investigations about the same place. There have been a lot of research, and all the independent investigations can conclude that there is not possible that the version of the government.
So Citlalli, I wanted to push on a little bit because we're talking about different versions, and I wanted to hear about the impact of these last 18 months, because it feels like something different is happening in Mexico because of these 43 students. You've had more than 20,000 people disappeared, John. Am I overestimating what this case has actually done for Mexico?
No, I don't think so. And I think, of course, we have to keep this case in context. It didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in a 10-year period of overwhelming horror that people had been living through across the country. 95% of crimes like murder aren't even investigated. The homicide rate exploded during a so-called drug war. Forced disappearance, human trafficking, human smuggling, extortion, kidnapping, all shot up in the context of this so-called drug war. I think it was a combination of particular elements of the violence exercised against the students that ignited the outrage and the rebellion, even though it was something that had been taking place across the country for years. And those elements, essential elements, were, again, it was coordinated state authorities, not just local municipal police. And this is so important. We do know what happened. These aren't versions. This has been exhaustively documented. I myself have interviewed more than 40 survivors of those attacks. We absolutely know that it was several different municipal police, state police forces, federal police forces, and military intelligence watching on. That it was a coordinated military-style attack from state forces against students who come from one of the most combative, socially active colleges in the country. And then the fact that the state's response was the same ineptitude, the same lack of concern, lack of empathy, and then bald-faced lying, which the bald-faced lying didn't start with Cocula. It started with the first mass graves that were uncovered in early October.
That's actually...
Yeah, and I mean... Yeah.
Go ahead, Ev.
What I was just going to say is just that, I mean, I'm totally agreeing with John. You have to see there are particular things about this case, but it's also this particular moment. You know, this case spoke to people in a way that others hadn't. And some of it is because of the uniqueness, because it was obvious that the students were victims, and victims of the government and organized crime. But it's also because a bunch of stories that all of us who work in Mexico had told ourselves for a really long time were finally just proved false. And that's that, well, this is something that it's tragic, but, you know, it happens up in Tijuana, or it happens in Juarez, or in Sinaloa, and these sort of exotic places that are, you know, beset by drug traffickers. And you know, even if this was disproportionate, well, they must have done something to deserve it. I mean, that was kind of the early line of the drug war. There were many excuses that people made for not paying attention to massacres and disappearances. And this one just kind of, it came at this moment where all of a sudden, none of those excuses worked anymore. And all of a sudden, you know, people saw this one case in which it was just so obvious that none of those excuses could explain what happened.
You know, I would say this commenter on Twitter, Gabriela, would agree with you about excuses. She writes in Spanish, and we've translated it, that there is no political willingness, no transparency, or any control mechanisms in place to hold those responsible for the investigation accountable and really answer to those excuses, as you called them. But I want to push this on just a little bit and go to the voice of an actual parent who was affected. Citlalli, I will pass this to you once we play it, because you're the one who actually shot this video for us. So have a listen to Hilda Hernandez.
We don't believe in the government because they have lied to us from the beginning of the process until today. We have been very active, organizing marches, asking for answers about our children, and we will keep on doing so until the government gives us answers. We know there are a lot of people involved in this crime, from the police to the military, and the government does not want to investigate them. We will keep on fighting until we find our children.
Citlalli, I know you've talked to lots of families. What are they telling you?
I think they are very desperate about what is happening. There are no signs of that the government has inspired any wish to find the truth and make justice about what's happening. They are really expecting a responsible answer from the government, a respectful answer. They are very angry about what happened yesterday when they doesn't be consulted, that doesn't be informed about a big declaration that the government made that's re-victimize them. This is not a respectful attitude from a government who has to respect human rights. And we think that they are waiting for very important signs, but they are also asking for the the international community to be consulting, to be attentive about what is happening, and they don't leave them alone. We are expecting that this month the experts leaving Mexico, and this is very concerning. It's a very we are very concerned about this matter because we need the attention of the international community. We need to recognize what the parents, the mothers are telling us, and there's not only about the 43 students who are missing. We are talking about 28,000 families in the record, the official record, about who are disappeared. They are not missing. They have been disappeared, and we need to, the government, assume the responsibility. Now there is a law who is in discussion here in Mexico about this matter, but this is not only about 43 students, it's about a nation who is in a very painful moment, and the parents of the 43 are now asking for they not be forgotten, and their fight has to be understand in all their complexity and in a context that it's very, very hurtful for Mexican people.
Sure. See, John, for you, it doesn't sound like there's much mystery left in this case. You've spoken to families, you've spoken to people who were there at the spot on the 26th of September 2014. Is there anything more to be investigated?
Well, of course, we're still looking for the 43 students. I mean, that is the great mystery, right? And the parents' demand continues to be they were taken alive, we demand them back alive.
Sure.
And so we're still looking for them, and we're still looking for them alive. I think another mystery, and this is...
But the Attorney General said that the students were all killed. What's your sense?
The Attorney General based that on 3 mutually contradictory interviews. It was ridiculous. There's no scientific evidence that has been put forward in 18 months to support that statement. He, arrogantly and pathetically called it the so-called historic truth. And then, of course, the parents, right in that press conference that you showed a clip from, right after the independent commission put forward their report, they called it the great historic lie, right? The same woman we listened to from Doña Blanca.
Have there ever been any investigations where people who went missing, they came back in Mexico? Does this happen?
There have been so many different cases. I know a case, for example, of a woman who was told, her son was disappeared. This was in Sinaloa. And after a number of months, the police took her a body. And the body was wearing her son's clothes, but the body wasn't her son's body. The fingertips had been removed.
Wow.
All of the man's teeth had been removed and his face destroyed. But she looked for a mole on the lower back, which wasn't there, and said, "This isn't my son." Right? And so there's cases from and what's happening now, which is really important, is the way in which people in communities and families directly impacted are organizing amongst themselves to look for bodies and to try and find their loved ones, as has happened in the city of Iguala, where more than 300 families have combed the hillsides outside of Iguala, and in the past year have found more than 100 bodies in mass graves, clandestine mass graves.
John and Jose and Citlalli and Ev, I'm taking you all to the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. Malika.
I'll end with this tweet from Mary Speck. She says the independent panel raised questions that demand answers. The government should see them as allies and not rivals. This case is way too important.
Would you like to join in our conversation? It's not too late. We're going to be online in our post show, stream.aljazeera.com. Hope to see you there. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hello, we're talking about the case of Mexico's 43 missing students and also 20,000 disappeared people in Mexico as well. The 43 are more a symbol of what's going on in Mexico. There's a lot more to discuss, so let's get right back to it. Citlalli, you were talking about you want the international community to pay attention. What can they do? Isn't this a question about how business is conducted in Mexico? Isn't this a cultural issue, a government issue? What is acceptable to the people in Mexico? What can the international community do? What do you want them to do?
I think it's very important to everybody to be informed about what's happening here. This is a first thing. The government, Mexican government, has been taking all this matter hidden for several years. It has to happen something so terrible that what's happening in Ayotzinapa for the international community to know what is going on here. We need everybody to try to be close to the information that is being given. Every 26th of each month, the parents are making a lot of actions. Internationally, there's been very supported from a lot of countries and a lot of committees that has been doing solidarity for solidarity alive now. So we also can to request to the international community not only to be attentive, also to ask themselves, what can they do for us? We don't know their conditions. We need to be a participative attitude. And now that the international committee it's leaving us, we think it's quite important more than ever to don't let this go to the closest place from what is going on. Here is not only about who is being disappeared, it's also about who has been killed. We have a very high levels of people murdered in all the nation, women, children. The next Thursday, the committee is going to listen, international committee, they are going to talk about what's happening with children and all and everything that's happening here needs to be attentive, but also be active in action.
There are very specific things I think we can do as internationals too. I mean, let me just signal three things. One, I think that the Ayotzinapa case proves that getting the names of the disappeared and their families out there, seeing them on Al Jazeera, printed in the New York Times, actually helps to protect those families. One of the most targeted groups in Mexico recently, really over the last 10 years, are actually the family members of previous victims. That's really important. I think one of the second things we can do is go to our own governments. The United States government continues to give financial and diplomatic support to this regime in Mexico, despite this terrible record of forced disappearances. We've not really used that as a lever. I think that's something we have to demand in our own political constituencies. And third, I would say we have to think about the people who've been displaced by this conflict, the victims' families who've had to flee, either fleeing their hometowns and going elsewhere in Mexico or seeking asylum abroad. You know, right now, people who come to the United States from Mexico, for example, who are the victims of these kind of events or their family members, they have the hardest time of any group from anywhere in the world at getting asylum in the United States. The grant rate for 2013, the last year we have data, was only 4.7%. So we have to speak up and work within our own system to make sure that people who are the victims of severe violations of human rights are actually recognized as such.
You gave some great tips there. This is Omar, who has some ones that echo ones that you raised. Omar says pressure from civil society, including media outlets, national and international helps, accountability and transparency is necessary. But I want to end from the community with this and give this to you, Jose. This is a comment we got from someone named Andalucia, and she talks about what this means for residents in Guerrero and in Mexico and the effects on them. Have a listen to what she said.
A year and a half has passed since the disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students, and nothing, absolutely nothing is known about their whereabouts and whether they're dead or they're alive. The group of experts have said that an essential part of their investigation is ensuring that a case like this will not happen again. Yet just last month, 5 young people were disappeared and killed at the hands of state police in Veracruz, showing that the security situation in Mexico has not improved at all and that this case could occur once again.
Jose, what assurances, if any, are residents of Guerrero getting to assure them that this won't be them next?
I don't think that there, in Guerrero, particularly Guerrero, there is any possibility of assurance that this won't happen again. Guerrero is a very peculiar region of the country for many reasons, historic, geographic, etc. So, and I will not dwell into that. But there is no assurances that this will not happen again there for whatever other reason. The problem is, again, here is that you have a problem with the credibility of the government, you have a problem of credibility to a degree with to the different groups that are involved, and you have a problem of polarization. And this means that this truth in specific might never be perfectly clear. Now, what is important here is the accountability, is responsibility, that this kind of things cannot happen again. And this is a work for a long time.
So I want to say thank you to John and Jose and Citlalli and Ev for helping us just understand where are we right now with this case, this story, and the bigger picture for Mexico and also the international community. Thank you so much for joining us. About 18 months ago, the families of the 43 students got together. They made a video. It is as relevant then as it is today. I'm going to play out with that video. Thanks everybody for being on this edition of The Stream. Take care.
Estaré contenta hasta que mi hijo regrese a casa.
Nosotros queremos, como padres, decirle a toda la sociedad que nos ayuden, que nos apoyen, ¿verdad?
Pedimos a las autoridades a nivel nacional, internacional, para que exijan al gobierno de México, Enrique Peña Nieto, para que nos ayude a solucionar los problemas que están suscitando en cada municipio.